Yes. To start at the beginning. I was brought up between two females. Between my mother on one side and my granny on the other side. And my mother seemed to me perfectly normal. And my granny seemed rather sad and quiet. And over time, it never occurred to me, of course, when I was a child, why Granny might be sad. But Granny was sad because Mother wasn't a believer. Mother was an agnostic. And I grew up with the tension between these two women as a child. And I remember my granny clearly reprimanding my mother for wearing lipstick. And I actually, at that stage, I felt sympathy with Mother because I liked colour. I liked red lips. But then at about the age of 8, I discovered Granny's Bible. And it was my granny was an evangelical. So my mother was brought up more or less as a Protestant. But like so many Protestants, and I'm afraid so many Catholics, she didn't practice, she didn't continue to take it seriously. But this Bible, heavily underlined in my granny's house, I discovered the line, "I am the way, the life, and the truth." And I thought that was an amazing claim. In one of the Gospels, probably the Gospel of St. John. I don't remember at this moment. And I realized, you know, that this tension between the two women, I would have to come out one way or the other. I'd have to find out. But of course I realized it was much too big a question for me at that stage. But there I was, you see, I loved my mother. She was devoted to me and brought me up well. And indeed, in my adolescence, we had great conversations, great argumentations, and much tussle, for which I am grateful at this stage. But I did hold it in the back of my mind. I did hold it in the back of my mind that wouldn't it be absolutely wonderful if what Christ had said and I had read were true. because I went to a school which was much too good for me. Protestant school, of course, but a relation who felt that my father had given my mother a rough time, provided the wherewithal for this rather superior school. And they had a great library. And I had, about the second year in school, I had discovered painting with my mother at exhibitions. When was it? About 1940 something or another. 1944, 1943 maybe. In the library they had a book on El Greco. I had seen the exhibition of modern art from the continent, modern art that was in in Irish collections, and I had enjoyed it indeed. And I discovered this book of El Greco, and I was amazed. I was amazed. And here was something marvelous. And I think that the thing that really swung me was that it was figurative, but it was abstract as well, and there was a heightened sensibility, a very excited, nervous sensibility. And there was ecstasy. And if the marvelous exists, a lot of people don't believe it can exist, but if it exists, then there will be ecstasy. So, at this stage, I was a modern. So this Christian fellow, El Greco, excited me, but I was still a modern. I was living in a different generation from El Greco. And then El Greco really couldn't. El Greco was too sophisticated a painter for me to take on board as a young fellow. His drawing was, which is very quite remote from nature. I mean, there might be 12 heads in a figure by El Greco instead of 8. He drew very freely, and he had this wonderful arabesque, this wonderful soaring line. And it was quite abstract, and then the way he contrasted the earthly with the heavenly. And he could be quite realistic. He was a great portrait painter as well as being a painter of the sacred theme. And so he could combine realism, a certain realism, with his intellectual figuration of the marvellous. But this was too great for me. So I discovered the Italian Renaissance. And by the time I was 17, I knew every minor master in the pantheon of Italian painting. I'm sure I was a bore, you know, but there. So this Italian painting especially the primitives, the early Italian painters, they convinced me of the beauty of Catholicism. So the arguments with my mother heated up. But there it was. I was no longer totally in sympathy with the moderns. That was the end of the dominance of my mother's contemporaneity. My mother was a great reader, and so she was a powerful one to argue with. And then the other great influence, which I discovered with the English master at school, the Reverend R.E.C. Brown, was T.S. Eliot. And of course, T.S. Eliot really shook up English poetry. Shook up the whole late 19th century pastoral tradition, and gave us the dirty streets of London. And but he, of course, also gave a larger picture of the relation of the secular with the sacred. And so between T.S. Eliot and El Greco, my fate was sealed. My mother died in 1958, and it took me another 5 years to become a Catholic. And you see, what was born into me with this experience of Italian painting and so on, and falling in love with the work of El Greco, what was born into me was that art is born of ritual. That fundamentally what happens in ritual, in the religious ritual, is the same as what happens in painting and novels and films and music and so on, that everything is brought together. All the contradictions in our nature, all our sensuality, our lust, our love of pleasure, all our aspirations, our desires, our desire for infinity, our imagination, our intellectuality, our sensuality, our you name it. The imagination gathers these things and makes wholes out of them. Wholes that allow us to become full men. So art, I believe, is a kind of sacrament. A sacrament in the order of nature. It's not difficult to believe in, because imagination guides us. And as T.S. Eliot remarked, once art has watered a religion, then it is proven. It's not proven in a scientific sense, but it is proven because men have been there. So ritual relates us to life as a whole. Art begins in the reliquary, the little boxes that are made for the bones of the saints. Art is made in memory of where we come from. And of course, the whole difficulty of modern art, you know. Modern art is fraught with the conflict of the crisis of man in the 20th century. And Gauguin was a Catholic, and Van Gogh was a Protestant. And Van Gogh was a bit like myself. He was a bit agnostic. And Gauguin, who had been a seminarian, I believe, according to a friend of mine, he believed that naturalism as an artistic practice, which of course had the credibility of the Impressionists to sanctify it in critical terms. Gauguin didn't believe in that road. Gauguin was a synthesist. Van Gogh, well, the Impressionists anyway, were analyzers, fundamentally analyzers. But Gauguin was a synthesist. And what was he synthesizing? He was synthesizing the different layers in man. And he was trying to present us with a whole man. I think I have been very fortunate. Other people who probably say I'm not really properly modern. How can you be modern and religious? But you can't please everybody all the time. I think I was very fortunate in the influences of T.S. Eliot, who wrote poetry in a modern, contemporary vernacular. And I was fortunate in the influence of Greco, because Greco is a bit of a freak in the European tradition. Greco came from the island of Crete, and so he was a very good icon painter, actually, and very influenced by when Constantinople fell to the Turks. There was an immediate exodus of icon painters from Constantinople to Crete, and he learned a lot from them. But they, in turn, were subject to the influence of prints, art prints from Italy. And so they were trying to incorporate a certain amount of naturalism without actually losing their artistic vision. And maybe Greco felt in his late 20s, maybe he saw that this tradition of this Eastern tradition of painting had a limited lifespan. And so he went to Venice, which was, of course, the colonizer of Crete. And so he was like going to London from Galway, you can put it like that. And there he started painting with color that drew, so that all the interior forms of the silhouette were drawn in contours, but drawn in contours of color. And even at this stage, one sees the immediacy of his style, because there's so much movement in his figures, and already he is discovering his own way of composing a sacred theme. So he stayed in Venice for a few years, and then he stayed in Rome, and and then that was at the time, that was coincided, his visit to Rome coincided with the building of the Escorial. And various ecclesiastics, he knew various ecclesiastics, and they had a few introductions to give him, and he met one or two Spaniards in Rome. And so in what was it, about 1575 or so, he left for Spain. And the extraordinary thing is how just that transition from being a young man in Rome and Florence, when he moved to Spain, he grew. He suddenly discovered what would become his main ethos and his main idiom for painting for the rest of his life. And so that the early works that he did are so complete and so strongly themselves that it is really an extraordinary blossoming of a way of painting. He was a clever fellow, you know, and he knew everybody in Toledo, which was a very high-powered town at that time, and he was on a committee for church art, and evidently what he offered aesthetically in support of the ritual of the church in Toledo, which was known as the New Rome, was approved of by the church. And he was a success. And then, when he died, the Trinitarian monk Paravicino, who had painted a wonderful portrait of him in Boston, he wrote an elegy which was read at his grave. And then, when he died, the whole business of counter-Reformation art got into another groove, and the martyrdom of the saints took the place of more central themes of Christ's life. And these martyrdoms of the saints were very realistic. And after 100 years or so, people couldn't see El Greco's paintings. They couldn't get anything out of them. They thought that he was mad. But of course, he wasn't. Yes. Well, as a young man, I grew up in the war. And I still remember photographs of Jews being rounded up in Amsterdam, and cities being bombed, and Budapest being captured. And I was beginning to paint then. It was a very serious pastime for me, if pastime I could call it. And I painted a lot of war scenes. I used to paint them by floating the watercolor onto the paper, stretched paper of course, and then painting them with ink. And the ink used to go in all sorts of marvelous directions. And it was very good technique for bombed houses. And then I left school, and just about the time when the war ended, I think it was 1945, am I right? Yeah, 1945. And that was the first year that I had a painting in living art. And of course the painting, my poor painting, was called The Wasteland, because my favourite poet had written a poem called The Wasteland. And about this time I was getting very interested in William Blake. And I was very interested in his theory of imagination. And so I painted a picture, a very small, modest painting, of the ascension of souls. Rather Blakean, let's admit. But immediately I painted this picture, I said, well now, that's one truth. What about the truth that I was painting when I was painting the bombed houses? Can I find a single image that will suffice for those two happenings in my soul? And I think it was that questioning of myself that turned me into a painter. So, as a young fellow, between the ages of 15 and 21, I looked at everything. And I still feel that an artist needs to look at everything. Stuff that he likes, stuff that bores him, stuff that is interesting or he disagrees with, or stuff that he can actually take into his heart. And of course, I was aware of icons, and very moved by icons. And they have really had a prodigious influence on me. But I have never been an icon painter, because icons belong to a sacral language. And the language that inhabits us these days is vernacular, demotic. And I have to communicate with my fellow men demotically. So, even though I have copied old masters, and I recommend copying of old masters, they have been Renaissance and post-Renaissance rather than iconographers. And so I I have looked at my contemporaries. I've learned a lot from certain contemporaries. I'm very indebted to the painter of wine bottles in Italy, called Giorgio Morandi, a wonderful painter. Very indebted to Rouault and to Matisse and Bonnard. And, maybe I'm a sort of later day nabby. But the nabby is a French word for prophet. And these painters, Bonnard and Vuillard, call themselves nabbies. And I'm very indebted to them and to Gauguin. So I tend to, I've incorporated modern colour, the colour of Matisse and Bonnard and others, to my own purposes. I have incorporated the imagery of various artists of the past who were not that religious, but whose work had a spirituality in it, or something, some anxiety which was fundamentally religious. And of course, this is our anxiety. And I turn these artists around, their visions around, to face Christ. So I say no to art for art's sake. I regard art as an anthropological activity in which we see life reborn. Art has a purpose, non-political, the purpose of human transformation in spirit. It helps us to die well. Thank you.